o'clock, so I think we'll get started. I hope you enjoyed the scrolling slides of all of our graduates, and we'll get back to that in a little bit. But I wanted to introduce myself because I am a new face. Even though it says Carolyn Matisky, I am Marissa McCasty. I'm filling in for Carolyn and for this session. I am the Leadership Development Manager for SUNY Sale, and I just had some housekeeping things. I know, being that this is the graduation and the culmination, you probably all know about these housekeeping, things that we have to do, but just a few things: testing your speakers and microphone, turn on your video, mute your line, and enter any questions that you have in the chat. We're happy to answer those, and happy to troubleshoot if anyone is having an issue. And as always, this meeting will be recorded so that we can listen to it again and look back on it and see how wonderful this graduation was. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen.
Thank you, Marissa. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, I appreciate you and Jamie putting music to that. It was fun to watch, and I really can't believe it's been a year since we launched our first RAVA program. Today, I have the honor of introducing Jeff Cheek. He's the president of the Research Foundation, and he has made time in his busy day to be with you and to celebrate this year-long period of learning together. As you know, the Research Administrators Symposium was a time that many of us got together, which I thought was wonderful. But I think the real focus and the core of research administration has been very present the past 3 years because of our president. And so I'm going to let him say a few words at your graduation ceremony. Jeff?
Thank you, Kathleen. So congratulations to all of you on graduating from the very first Research Administrators Virtual Academy. We had over 50 participants from 14 campuses in our central office that started this journey back in September of last year, and you've all completed 12 intense months of learning. You come from such varied backgrounds. I see that many of you work in sponsored programs, both on the pre and the post-award side, but also appreciate the human resources and finance professionals, as well as the research assistants and administrative staff who participated. A few of you sat on curriculum panels for RAVA sessions. To each of you that did that, I express my appreciation and congratulations. I understand that your sessions span from a contracts master's class to navigating your ship through the academic minefield. I also understand that some of the more popular courses were managing your audit findings and leadership lessons from neuroscience, which seems a bit counterintuitive that they'd be so diverse, but those were the two of the most appreciated. So glad to know that those were enjoyable. I'm also glad that many of you were able to attend the Research Administrator Symposium that we had back in the spring, because everybody here thinks that it's very important that we all get as much face time together as we can. In closing of my remarks, I'd like to thank you for taking on this program and for your commitment and dedication to making this a great research foundation in support of SUNY. Special thanks to Carolyn and Marissa from the Sale Institute, and from here Central Office to Kathleen and Jamie for their continued commitment to your professional development. And finally, I'd like to also say that our speaker today, Matt Horhan from AAAS, he's a great speaker. He's been at both of our Research Administrator Symposium. I've also heard him speak many times at COGA meetings in DC. And given the current chaos in Washington, Matt has a great ability to dispassionately, objectively explain the method behind the madness and actually make sense of what's happening in the changing funding environment. So I look forward to his talk later today. I'm going to turn this over to Scott Shurtleff for introductions. Thank you, Scott.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And on a personal note, I just want to congratulate everyone again. I mean, a lot of you folks I have worked with personally over the years, and I'm really excited that we're at this stage with this program. For today's final session, we really wanted to energize this graduating cohort with a thoughtful session on what the future of sponsored funding may look like in a challenging time, as Dr. Cheek has outlined. So Our featured keynote speaker will be Matt Hurahan, and I'll return to him in a second. And Matt will be joined by panelists, Amy Herstack. She is an industrial contract administrator at the University of Buffalo. Amy has been in the tech transfer office for nearly 4 years, and she really focuses on industry-sponsored research agreements, clinical and non-clinical, Buffalo Institute of Genomics transactions, business and economic development team. And prior to this, Amy came to us from corporate America with 7 years at Rich Products in the General Counsel's office. So that is wonderful experience to bring to a campus looking to build new relationships. And our other panelists will be Matt Morose. Matt is a director of enterprise technology transfer for the Research Foundation at SUNY. And in this capacity, Matt directs the development, implementation, and management of enterprise-wide technology, business solutions and programs that advance and facilitate the marketability of SUNY innovation and the protection of SUNY intellectual property. He also manages system-wide initiatives and quite frankly has about 3 other jobs. So, and then our keynote, we're going to go back to another Matt, Matt Hurahan. Matt is the Director of R&D Budget and Policy Program for the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences. He is a regular source of information and analysis on past, present, and future science budgets for policymakers in the science community, and he has been in this very important position since 2011. Prior to joining AAAS, Matt served as Clean Energy Policy Analyst at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Previously, he also served as a Jan Scory Fellow at the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, which is a coalition of energy firms and utilities working to engage policymakers for market-based solutions to sustainable energy development and climate change. And we have asked Matt to come back and talk to us again. We've had some changes since April in an ever-changing environment. Some other information has come in. And again, we're asking him to help us assess where things are and where things may be going for all of us in our roles as sponsored programs, administrators, and other managers in higher ed, how to anticipate and plan for the future. Matt, can I hand it over to you, please?
Yes, you can. Thank you very much for that intro. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. So I am going to attempt to share my slideshow. Okay, is that?
You got it.
Okay, right on. So I've been asked, as you heard, I've been asked to provide an update and outlook on where federal science funding may be headed here in the next year and beyond. And I think if you really want to understand where research funding is going, here we go. Often research dollars are often a function of the bigger picture. So starting with the bigger picture, I think, is a pretty good place to begin. And when I talk about the big picture, I mean specifically the part of the budget that's known as discretionary spending. Discretionary spending is the part of the federal budget that's allocated annually through the appropriations process. And in this graph, this is a graph of the entire federal budget. Discretionary spending are the red and the blue slices. So it's about 1/3 of all federal outlays these days. It used to be a much larger slice of the pie, but it's shrunk relative to the rest of the budget in recent decades. And discretionary spending, it's important, it's relevant for us because it's the home of just about all federal research spending. So the National Science Foundation, NIH, NASA, the Energy Department, they're all contained within the discretionary budget. And one of the weird quirks of our system is that R&D doesn't tend to change a whole lot as a share of the discretionary budget. So since about 1980 or so, as discretionary spending goes, so goes R&D for the most part. Now, discretionary spending has been capped for most of the past decade. And it was capped under the terms of the Budget Control Act, which was passed in 2011. And under the Budget Control Act, discretionary spending was scheduled to decline dramatically starting in 2013 through a mechanism known as sequestration. Can you actually see my mouse, my cursor?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I can Did not know that. So, so under the Budget Control Act, spending was scheduled to decline by about 8 to 10% for both defense and non-defense programs in 2013. This chart only shows non-defense programs, but same story for defense spending. If I were to show you that, so we'd have these big, 8 to 10% across the board program cuts for discretionary spending in 2013, and then steady growth, somewhat ahead of the rate of inflation from this lower baseline from 2013 through 2021, when the spending caps expire. And the whole point of this legislation was to reduce discretionary spending, reduce deficits, and under the terms of this law, it would have meant over $1 trillion less for in discretionary spending over this time period, which in turn would have meant tens of billions of dollars less for research spending over this time. And naturally, when Congress adopted this law way back in 2011, it was immediately cause for major concern from the DC research community and other folks who rely on the discretionary budget. Now, fortunately for science, almost immediately, as soon as Congress adopted this law in 2011 to cut spending, they immediately began trying to find ways around it. And so what they've done in the years since then is they've added every year at least tens of billions of dollars back into the discretionary budget. And this has meant extra spending for NIH, for NSF, and other research programs than they may have received otherwise. And this most notably resulted in big increases in discretionary spending in 2018 and then 2019. And you can see kind of in the earlier years of this decade, we've had some increases in discretionary spending, and this has made a difference, has meant additional research dollars available. But then in 2018, Congress kind of they blew way beyond where they may have, where they had been going previously. Added about $160 billion total in the discretionary budget for 2018, then another big increase in 2019. And these changes, and especially the increase in 2018, meant that the 2019 fiscal year saw the largest growth in about a decade and a half for research programs. So we had about a 15% increase in the basic science office in the Department of Energy. We had about a $3 billion increase for NIH, and other programs saw big increases as well. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, these years, 2018 and 2019, really generous spending, and there's been this still, I think, this idea that in these years, this notion in these years under the Trump administration, we've had some pretty massive spending cuts. And it's true the Trump administration has tried to dramatically scale back federal research dollars, but the reality of it has been the exact opposite. And we've had some pretty dramatic growth in these past few years because of Congress kind of riding to the rescue, avoiding the big spending cuts we may have gotten, and instead adding money back into the budget. Now, the trick coming into this year, in which Congress is debating the 2020 fiscal year spending cycle, is that the most recent budget deal, which affected 2018 and 2019, was scheduled to expire. And starting in 2020, we were looking at another round of these across-the-board spending cuts of about 10%. So you can imagine what a reduction of 10% out of the NIH budget, 10% reduction to the NASA budget and other agencies you may care about, what that may have meant for science programs. This was a major point of concern for both Democrats and Republicans alike, albeit for some different reasons. And so one of the questions coming into this fiscal year, this appropriation cycle, is what does Congress do with this situation? Do they allow these spending cuts to happen? Do they mitigate them somewhat? Do they increase spending? Well, into that debate, we've had incredibly divergent proposals. First, earlier this year, back in March, we had President Trump's latest budget request for the 2020 fiscal year. That's the orange dotted line here. And for non-defense spending, and non-defense spending is, again, where NIH and most other research programs live, the Trump administration embraced these big spending cuts. They went along with these 10% cuts to non-defense spending, and then would continue cutting non-defense spending well into the future, which, this kind of a trend line would mean, basically catastrophic reductions to most federal research programs. And the Trump administration's budget request, agency by agency, was correspondingly pretty tough, as it has been in years past. Not the first. This is not the first time we would have seen big cuts to science agencies. Conversely, House Democrats on the Appropriations Committee adopted a very different strategy. They simply assumed, or in the legislative parlance, they deemed an overall discretionary spending target of about 5% above 2019 levels. So that's this short line here. And this moderate increase in discretionary spending meant that the House numbers were dramatically different from the White House budget request. And again, this is not the first time we've seen this kind of a distinction between the White House and Congress. And again, the White House, this is simply percentage changes year over year, proposed by the White House in the orange, and then adopted in the House in the blue. And you can see some of the big differences between the White House and the House. From the White House perspective, their budget again echoed their past budget requests, and it's been very similar, really. I mean, they've got this White House has issued 3 full budget requests, and they've all been very similar. In particular, this White House has been very interested in trying to cut back energy technology R&D programs, climate research, environmental research, as well as other programs. But they've also gone after basic science funded by NIST, NSF, NIH, as you can see. Then again, as you can see, the House has almost across the board said thanks, but no thanks. And instead of going along with these cuts, they've adopted some moderate to, in some cases, sizable increases for science programs. And just I'll try to go quick here. I do want to get into a little bit of detail, agency by agency, for some of the larger research funders. And if people have questions or want additional detail, feel free to ask, or on our website, you get a lot more information. But just to start with some of the big ones, starting with NIH. In the House, again, we have seen another $2 billion increase for NIH, about a 5% increase above 2019 levels. And that would be, if those numbers were to hold up, that would represent the 5th year in a row that we've gotten increases of at least $2 billion for NIH. So it's been, after close to a decade of stagnation for NIH, we have had some pretty notable congressional generosity in the past 5 years. Within NIH, just about every individual institute would receive increases of about 5%, with some variation, some larger, some a little bit smaller. Precision medicine and Alzheimer's research continue to be major priorities for the Congress. Alzheimer's would rise, overall funding would rise to about $2.4 billion. And again, that would continue several years of increased funding for Alzheimer's research. Precision medicine funding would reach about $500 million. In addition, we'd get some new money for new initiatives on pediatric cancer, which would receive about $50 million. Gun violence research and extramural R&D facilities would both see new funding of $25 million each. In addition to that $25 million for NIH on gun violence research, we'd also get $25 million on the same topic for CDC in House legislation. At the Defense Department, we'd see some pretty major cuts for science and tech programs overall, although basic science, which is probably the most relevant for you all and for universities in general, would be about flat in the House bill. We'd see increases for Army basic science. You can see university research initiatives listed there, about a 7% increase. Several kind of continuing priorities include hypersonics, cybersecurity, AI. DARPA would get about a 3% increase in the House legislation. Good numbers for NSF, about a 7% increase for NSF in the House bill. NSF would end up at about $8.6 billion total. Also good numbers for the Department of Energy. Starting with the Office of Science, which is the big basic science funder. The office would reach about $7 billion under these numbers, increases of just over 4%. Congress continues to support computer science, math research, exascale computing, education programs, especially for undergrads. On the fusion research front, we'd see increases for domestic programs as well, but the big increase there would be ITER funding. That's the International Fusion Energy Project, which would see a near doubling. And the Energy Frontier Research Centers program, I'm not sure if SUNY has hosted any of these in the past. They may have, and if not, perhaps they could in the future. But the Energy Frontier Research Centers program would receive a 9% increase in the 2020 fiscal year under the House bill, and there would be a new round of funding in the 2020 fiscal year. On the DOE technology front, we'd see big increases of at least 11% for renewable energy R&D, efficiency R&D. ARPA-E, that's the Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy. They fund high-risk, high-reward research. They've been a bit of a political football in recent years, but the Congress has protected them and has achieved some plus-ups in recent years. Grid security, reliability, et cetera, would see some increases. And then USDA would do well in the House bill, especially for competitive extramural grants under the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative. It would receive about a 12% increase or a $50 million increase above FY 2019 levels. So that, again, continues some pretty dramatic growth that program has seen in recent years. Other USDA research programs would do all right. One of the big controversies for USDA has been the Trump administration's efforts to move the National Institute of Food and Agriculture as well as the Economic Research Service out of DC. This has prompted mass resignations on the part of USDA staff within those agencies. It's prompted some pretty major outcry from the advocacy community here in DC. And in the latest kind of development, USDA is moving ahead with this move, which the USDA Inspector General has said may actually break the law because Congress has not provided funding for this move in recent appropriations bills. And USDA did not provide some sufficient warning and some other factors in play here. But so that's kind of an interesting debate. Continues to be a major point of controversy, and we'll see where it goes. It appears that this move is continuing to proceed. We'll see if the House files suit, or what may happen on that front. It's still kind of a controversy underway. And just a few other notes. I mean, I'm not going to get into great detail. NASA would see some increases for their science programs. The education office at NASA would be spared from elimination, as would Space Grant, as would Sea Grant, funded by NOAA. Other environmental research programs would be fine. They would dodge some of the big recommended cuts by the White House. In some cases, we'd see some pretty major plus-ups, including research programs for NOAA, for coastal research, ocean, Great Lakes research, climate research, et cetera. USGS would see some big increases. And then I mentioned CDC would see close to $1 billion increase, and we'd see increases for veterans-related research, NIST labs, and so on and so forth. So again, coming out of the House, and the House has made really good progress on their spending legislation. The full House has adopted, I believe, 10 out of 12 spending bills. So how things are looking good coming out of the House. The caveat to all this, unfortunately, is that it doesn't really matter exactly what the House does. It matters what Congress does. And Congress as a whole has yet to adopt anything regarding science spending. What they have done is reach an overall spending deal to avoid that big spending drop that I mentioned and raise the spending caps for 2020 and 2021. That's the good news. The not quite so good news is that they actually ended up going with about $15 billion less than the House had recommended. So all of those numbers I just ran through, some of them may hold up, but many of them may not. So the issue now is, how does Congress fit these overall spending increases into a slightly larger bucket than they thought, than the House had been working with. So that's kind of where we are now. This spending deal that they just adopted, this became law just not even a month ago. And so in terms of where we are now, they've got this spending deal in hand. They know that they've got spending caps in place. It has been signed into law. They can avoid this big 10% across the board spending cut that was, kind of moving, moving down the pike. Unfortunately, the Senate, they're pretty far behind where one might have expected them to be in any other year, in kind of a more normal year. Typically the House and the Senate are working on their spending legislation in June and July. The House, as I just ran through, has made really good progress. The Senate has issued nothing so far. So their plan, as of right now, they come back. They're on August recess right now. They come back starting September 9th. And their plan is to churn through as many spending bills as they can in rapid order in September and perhaps beyond. While they're behind, and we're probably looking at a continuing resolution into October and likely beyond. The good news from the Senate perspective is that there have been some real champions for research spending in the Senate in recent years. People like Roy Blunt, who chairs the NIH subcommittee, Lamar Alexander, who chairs the Energy Department subcommittee, Dick Durbin, who's been a big supporter of defense research programs, and he's the ranking member in the defense subcommittee, and many others as well. There's a pretty long list of research supporters in the Senate. So there's no reason to expect, given the Senate and the Congress has about a 3% increase in the spending caps to work with between 2019 and 2020. There isn't really any reason to expect anything but pretty positive numbers coming out of the Senate for the big funders of university research and extramural research. Even if they've got to end up scaling back some of the House numbers, as I mentioned. There's a lot that Congress can do with about a 3.5% increase in the spending caps in 2020. And in fact, that it may end up looking a lot like what we had in 2016 and 2017. So this chart simply shows you relative changes in discretionary spending going back to 2010. I've got some of the major research programs shown as well. And again, these are all relative changes. So I've got NIH, DOE, NSF, et cetera. And the current spending situation, it looks a lot like the 2016 and 2017 fiscal year. In that year, they adopted a spending deal that raised the spending caps by about, again, it was about a 4% increase that year. So a little bit less generous this time around. And that year, you can see what happened with NIH, with NASA, the Department of Energy, et cetera. We did have some fairly moderate increases on the order of 4, 5, 6% for these agencies that year. And that could be what we're looking at this time around as well for the 2020 fiscal year. The challenge for this go-around is the same as we had in 2017. While Congress did enact about a 3% increase for discretionary spending in 2020, spending is going to be nominal spending is flat in 2021, which means when you factor in inflation, you could be looking at a real dollar decline. And again, we had something similar scenario in 2016, 2017. That year in 2017, we had flat spending between 2016 and 2017. Factoring in inflation, it meant an actual real dollar decline. And we did have some agencies that didn't do quite so well, a lot of flat funding, some spending reductions in 2017. So the real kind of point of concern, I think, is not so much the 2020 fiscal year, but what happens next year, 2021. We've got an election year and a very limited fiscal room. But returning to the current year in 2020, so what we expect will happen is the Senate will churn through their legislation in September, perhaps into October. Once they've done that, they've got to start negotiating with the House to produce a final set of conference numbers. We expect that could go very quickly for most agencies. There are some outstanding issues. We do have this issue of the border wall that's been hanging out there. We don't know how much of a hard line the Trump administration is going to hold on that issue, and similarly how much of a hard line House Democrats are going to hold on that issue. Richard Shelby, the chair of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, has already said he's moved some funding over from the health spending bill, which funds NIH and other research programs and non-research programs. He's moved some funding over from there over to the Homeland Security bill, I believe, to fund the border wall. That's a non-starter for a lot of House Democrats. So that could be a big issue. In addition, we've got this gun violence research issue. House Democrats want to put in specific line item funding for that, whereas the Senate Republicans have argued that doesn't need its own line item. These agencies can fund this if they want to. We want to give them greater flexibility to fund that or not. So that could be an issue as well. And these two issues, the border wall and gun violence research, they could end up slowing down proceedings on the two biggest spending bills, funding the Department of Defense and funding the Department of Health and Human Services, which is responsible for, or is the home for NIH and CDC and other programs as well. So we'll see what happens there. On the other hand, Congress has done a really good job, at least the House so far, and the Senate will likely do a really good job of keeping the decks clear regarding the typical kind of problematic, challenging policy riders that often slow down other legislation. So the Commerce, Justice, Science Bill, the Interior Bill, this is legislation that funds EPA, the National Science Foundation, NASA, NOAA, the Energy Department. All of these could move pretty quickly. And so we may end up, we're almost certainly going to need a continuing resolution for at least some or all of these agencies. But it's possible that we could see final spending for some of the more non-controversial agencies like NSF, et cetera, much more quickly. And then, who's to say how long the NIH defense debate may last? It could go into November, December. It's very hard to predict. If one is optimistic, one may hope they can finalize all this, let's say in, late October or sometime in November, but it could take longer. We'll see what happens. And then beyond this year, which again, if they can sort out these issues, I think should be a moderately good year for research spending. I already talked about next year we could be looking at a very limited year with a less than 1% increase for defense and non-defense discretionary spending. It's going to limit the room that Congress is going to have to allocate funding for research. We've also got an election year, and the last couple of major, presidential election cycles have been fairly eventful, one might say, regarding appropriations timing. It's open question whether Congress can get spending done on time next year, or if they have to punt it into late fall after the election, or even into the beginning of the final year. So, we may or may not be looking at a pretty long-term continuing resolution for the next fiscal year, starting next fall. Then the spending caps do expire finally, starting in the 2021 fiscal year. So this is this will be for the appropriations debate after the. Spending caps expire for the 2022 fiscal year. So that is the 2021 spending debate. So we're still a couple of years away from that, but that will be one less thing Congress has to worry about. May make things a little bit easier in the future, in the long run. But in the very long run, we still have some major issues that the nation is dealing with. In particular, we're looking at continued increasing healthcare costs and an aging population. In the long run, we are looking at declining relative discretionary spending in the long term. That's what these graphics are from the Congressional Budget Office, and they kind of lay out some of these changes. In the very long term, if discretionary spending continues to decline relative to the rest of the budget, relative to Social Security, to Medicare, Medicaid, we're probably looking at, we may be looking at fairly stagnant research spending from the federal government over the next, few decades, which is continues to be a major issue and is certainly a point of concern, long-term concern for the research community. So I'll wrap up there. Maybe the last thing I'll say, since I've got you, we do have a lot more information on our website. One of the things we've been doing lately is interactive dashboards using Tableau that let you very easily and in real time see how different science agencies are faring. by agency, by program, et cetera. So if you want to see what is happening with, with say basic energy sciences at DOE, or with the planetary science program at NASA, or whatever, you can come to our website following that link, AAAS.org/RD. Pretty easily find these interactive dashboards. People seem to find them pretty helpful tools. So I'll wrap up there, and happy to take any questions, questions or comments, if I can clarify, if we have time.
Okay, so it does look like we have a question here from Lori and Charlene. Can you tell me where you said in Department of State fall? I don't know if they want to unmute their line to clarify, but that's the question.
Yeah, so I can just generally just kind of say, I mean, USAID, and the Trump administration has, like many other federal agencies, the Trump administration has been very interested in cutting back those budgets. Congress has not gone along with those changes either. I'm not sure how USAID fared in the House legislation. I know that Lindsey Graham is one of many in the Senate who values USAID and foreign aid in general. The Trump administration, I should say, Ed, is also very interested in not just scaling back funding in the next fiscal year, but in rescinding past funding that was provided for those programs. But they do have their supporters in Congress. I mean, I would expect again, things will turn out moderately positive for those programs as well this year. They are I should add, housed in the discretionary budget like other programs. So again, they tend to fare similar to other research programs. When there is an increase in discretionary spending, their budgets tend to be fine. So
Great.
And I see something, another comment here. Looks as if spending is at or near era levels of 2010. And yes, that's true. The way to think about research spending over the past decade is that after 2010, we had the Tea Party wave election, and that's when spending really began to come down. And there was a big crater for several years. But Congress has been doing a pretty remarkable job, frankly, the past, say 5 years or so, in restoring a lot of the cuts that we saw. And yes, so for agencies like NIH, the Department of Energy, and others, they're back to where they would have been, or back to where they were in 2010. And we'll see if that trend continues. But it's been very positive. A lot of very positive funding outcomes for research in recent years.
Great. This is Scott. Thank you, Matt. And we're going to open it up. And again, we've got Amy Herstack and Matt Morose. As folks recall from a number of talks to either our symposium or to the system, the Chancellor is looking to substantially grow research activity to tackle some major issues. And as Matt's data shows us, we can't rely on federal funding to be the 70 or 80% of our funding sources for that growth. So I've asked Amy and Matt to join Matt to talk about different or novel partnerships with industry sponsors or other sponsors to build on and leverage our substantial core of federal funding. And I don't know if who wants to maybe lead off with a comment? Or?
Sure, I'll start, Amy, if you don't mind. Amy and I, over the years, have worked on many collaborative initiatives, to support, better ways of working with industry and making sure that the RF's administrative infrastructure actually supports the climate that Scott had recently described. So this is probably the third or fourth time I've heard Matt speak, and it's always a sobering discussion, but it's it's also a comforting discussion too, because maybe what we're hearing in the media is about the federal funding situation isn't as detrimental as many of those in the media make us think, because it seems like federal funding is going to remain relatively stagnant, and from a strategic perspective, SUNY wants to increase its research capacity. So while we may be able to maintain our federal funds, I think if we're going to grow, we have to target other types of sponsors, even beyond federal, beyond state, but look to make more collaborative partnerships with industry. And I know everybody is aware of this, but I'll probably beat a dead horse. But just so you know, a multi-year project was to modify and reform SUNY's patent and inventions policy, which really dictates how we can work with sponsors and what happens to that intellectual property if it's created through the work of a sponsor, how ownership is determined between an industry sponsor, let's say, and the research foundation. And I guess we had our crystal ball 5 years ago when we were redrafting and reforming that patent policy, because now it's very flexible. It's a very flexible model. It's a very flexible piece of our administrative infrastructure to support our work, because it enables us to enter into engagements with industry that we would never be able to before. So it removes the barriers of our facilities-based policy, where all IP created within SUNY facilities was owned by the university. Now we have the option, so long as we're working in certain parameters, to allow our industry partners and sponsors to have ownership to IP, which was a much more modernized way of working with industry. And I think it has proven to be pretty successful recently with the announcement of 2 rather large industrial partnerships, one with Applied Materials through the SUNY Applied Materials Research Institute, and another one focusing on artificial intelligence, which with IBM. So together with those 2 partners, we've created system-wide research collaborations that are available to faculty members across the entire SUNY enterprise.
And just to build on that comment, Matt, the word that comes to mind, and you even said it, was flexibility in working with industry. That patent and invention policy really does allow us to meet companies where they are. Most industry sponsors want certainty when they're coming in to do a research project with us. They want to know that they're either going to have an exclusive license opportunity, or there's going to be no IP coming out of it. And because we have a lot of flexibility, we can address that up front. We can do that with the SWIFT licensing terms, where companies can pay an upfront fee, and then they have an exclusive license with a royalty holiday in the event that they commercialize the technology that they're licensing. And we have actually taken that approach on some other specific projects where we don't really think there's going to be anything licensable coming out of it, but they still want to have that exclusivity piece. So we say, okay, here's an upfront, we'll charge you an upfront fee for an exclusive license to something that we probably will never see in the marketplace, but at least it's going to be yours. And I think that that's something that industry really appreciates, at least when they're coming to us to do their initial research. And then further to that, I think every project that we do, there have been so many that they start out as maybe a small testing agreement, and it is very simple. It's actually critical. Because it's a relationship building process. So once we start with one thing, then they come back, and then they come back again, and then it's a much larger project. And we actually just signed a big agreement with a much more seasoned, much like a publicly traded company that we normally wouldn't have been able to get to that point, but it took a long time. We had to build the relationship, and now here we are, and we're looking to them to, I think, bring even more industries, more developed companies to us, just because we're doing work with them.
Yeah, so I'd say, what I think it means for us as research administrators and professionals is the agility to support faculty who have a couple, say, large NIH awards, maybe a couple clinical trials, maybe something else in the cell. It's thinking outside the box and thinking outside the standard sort of RFP response and project management timeline, where we're engaging on a number of fronts to help fund and facilitate the researchers' overarching research agenda in their particular field. I don't know, Jeff, if there's anything that you wanted to comment.
Well, it's also the other challenge is going to be that in shifting from where faculty are used to working in an environment where it's promoting basic research and you're working with traditional federal sponsors, if we are going to make a push to work more with industry, there is, and I know that Matt and the tech transfer directors are well aware of this, we've got to also educate the faculty, because if you think about it, having been a former faculty member myself, you're conditioned to making sure that whoever you're talking to understands you're the expert in the field and you're the best and brightest, and you're going to prove that by putting your ideas out there and explaining exactly why you are the expert in the field. Unfortunately, that does not translate well when working with potential industry sponsors, because you give away the top and they say, well, thank you very much, we'll call you. So there is an educational component that we're going to need to take on, but I do believe that they're making that effort. And I'm seeing some progress, for example, with the latest DoD Day, where we've done this twice now, where SUNY is being strategic and saying that DoD program managers have far greater latitude and discretion to make funding decisions compared to their counterparts at NIH and NSF. So strategically, we're trying to pair the correct SUNY faculty with the right expertise with program officers. And the first year, I happened to sit this was the second year back in June, I believe it was, Matt. And so the second time I happened to sit next to one of the program officers from one of the defense agencies. And he said, well, the first go round, we had these speed dating arrangements where faculty have 5 minutes basically to meet with the program officer and make a pitch. He said, well, the first go round is basically them talking for 4 minutes and then me trying to get a word in edgewise in the last minute. And so also working with the faculty to say, you really need to take more approach to say, what problem is it you're trying to solve? And here's how I can help contribute towards that. So I think that there is, if we are truly going to double the research enterprise as the faculty, as the chancellor has envisioned, that means that every institution is going to have to increase its market share, especially given Matt Herhan's presentation, where we're looking at flat budgets at best and the losses due to inflation. It's really a matter of how do we become more competitive in those arenas.
And one thing I'll note, that's a very good point, Jeff, about the shifting the culture of faculty working with maybe company proprietary data. Is for folks out there who are directly supporting faculty research areas who may be responding to call for proposals coming out from either the IBM partnership or the Applied Materials partnership, there will be some education on company confidential information and just helping your faculty to get used to working in that environment where you're not sharing everything around the water cooler, or you know, it's just, and I've worked with a number of very successful faculty over the years, whether it's SUNY or other universities where I've worked, and after a very short amount of time, faculty are quite adept at adjusting. You know, the company proprietary stuff goes into this silo in their head, and the federal funding discussions on this silo, and it's an adjustment that's usually made pretty quickly. So Matt Herhan in Washington, I don't know if you have any, having listened to a couple folks on our end, if you have any thoughts from the budgetary perspective or just your years of analyzing data in relation to research funding.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly the right instinct to feel that you have to diversify. I mean, there are going to be limits. The issue with federal spending, is not that it's in the long run anyway. Not necessarily that it's going to shrink, but that it's not going to grow. Most likely, it isn't going to grow sufficiently enough to meet demand. On the part of performers like yourselves. I guess the one thing I would say, I mean, there are some areas that do seem to grow a little better than others. Over the very long term, some of the big university funders like NIH, the National Science Foundation, and the Department of Energy, all three of those have actually grown relative to the rest of the discretionary budget. And especially, at least NIH, and I don't know if this is true of BOE as well, but at least NIH and NSF are about double their share of the discretionary budget is about double today what it was in 1980. So, I think it's, I sort of, would suggest that on the one hand, yes, there are going to be limits to the availability of federal research dollars in the future. On the other hand, there are areas, life sciences research certainly continues to be, I think, a major congressional priority. For obvious reasons. I mean, everybody, there isn't a district, a congressional district in America in which, every voter is in perfect health. So life sciences research will continue to be, a point of interest. And even beyond the life sciences, I mean, the fact that we are facing increased competitiveness pressure from China, all the metrics are looking increasingly scary in terms of spending, patenting, publications. There is those factors have been motivating Congress to try to take another look at the research budget and find ways to increase it. It's possible that what we're going to see in the coming years is what you might call an increasingly strategic funding environment from the Congress, where maybe we don't quite see kind of these general broad-based increases for an entire agency. But what we might see instead are sustained, long-term funding initiatives where, within a given agency, maybe a particular area gets favored. And that's where the funding goes for a while. For instance, in the Department of Energy recently, I mean, there's been a major focus on advanced computing, on exascale computing. And that part of the budget has grown much more rapidly than other parts of the budget. Again, what I mentioned earlier within NIH, Alzheimer's research has gotten a lot of attention lately. We've had the cancer moonshot, things like that. So, I mean, the role and prominence that those kinds of initiatives play within federal agency budgets, that may increase in the years ahead as dollars in general become more difficult. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that, the spending caps are expiring in a year or two. We do have, in the long run, we are going to have this eroding fiscal situation, $1 trillion deficits. And, these major issues, the big issues that have, prompted some of the Tea Party fiscal backlash, that prompted the spending caps that are in place now, these issues aren't going away. And so it's entirely possible that once the caps expire, that may open the door, perhaps in the year or two or three after that, that may open the door to another one of these attempts at kind of coming up with a fiscal reckoning to get our federal fiscal house in order, constrain growth and mandatory spending, get our revenues under control, get deficits under control. This is probably a long shot and probably wishful thinking on my part. But if Congress, let's say 5 years from now, is able to put together some kind of a bipartisan, grand bargain strategy plan, what have you, that does get our fiscal house in order, that's the kind of thing that actually could open the door for increased investment in research dollars. Because, basic science and university research is one of the few areas that Congress really does seem to get on a bipartisan basis. Democrats and Republicans alike, have been champions for basic science, for research dollars, et cetera. And often if Congress, this eroding research funding environment, it's not a product really of what Congress thinks of basic science. It's a product of what Congress thinks about everything else and how much they like spending on everything else. So if Congress, can, let's say again in 5 years or 10 years or whatever, can get their fiscal house in order, that could open the door for much better outcomes for research. But that is, needless to say, that's no small task, because it would require doing some things that everybody hates, like cutting back on mandatory spending, increasing revenues. So that's the other thing to kind of keep in mind. It's one reason why it's worth keeping an eye on the bigger fiscal picture here, and why I often focus on the bigger fiscal picture, because dealing with those issues could mean good things for research. But short of that, again, it may end up being a much more strategic environment in the next decade, let's say, where as issues emerge, as China takes the lead in certain areas, pick a discipline, material science or photonics or any number of areas. As China or other countries seem to move ahead, that may be incentive for Congress to throw money to those specific areas. So keeping an eye on emerging topics, emerging areas of strategic interest may be of interest and may be of value. So,
Great. Well, thank you.
So I have a follow-up, Matt. You made me think about, you're correct in that while we may talk about the overall federal budget being stagnant, not increasing until Congress gets the House in order, your point about looking at what has happened with some of the major funders and how the baseline has shifted tremendously is important. I think that in addition to what you're saying, that as China becomes more competitive, unfortunately, we tend to react out of fear and our federal priorities here. And so I think that, eventually we will have another presidential administration. There will be different parties in power in Congress. Priorities will shift. And I think there will also be factors such as recognition of the perils of climate change, et cetera. So if you're correct in that, we will probably see a shift in priorities and money being made available where it previously may not be at current levels. So the point's well taken.
Thank you. Thank you again to our panel, Matt Hurahan, Amy Herstack, and Matt Morose. And I'll hand the program back over to Kathleen and Jamie.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Before we let our fine speakers leave and we proceed with the graduation, is there any other question that anybody has for Matt, Amy, or Jeff? Or comments? Do you see anything in the chat feature? No? Okay. Well, once again, we thank you all for participating. This was a great session, and it's been recorded, so we'll be able to continue using it for other learning and development opportunities. Thank you again, Jeff, Matt, and Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
We're just going to go back to those slides that we started with, but we're not going to use the music. And I actually know a couple of our folks here have got to leave before 2:30. So our next exercise is actually a reflective piece, which we'd like you to tell us something you've learned and how you're going to apply it to your job. So while we're getting that PowerPoint back up, Marissa, with all of the, thank you. While we're doing that, I do have to just say, if it weren't for Scott Shirtliff, we wouldn't have had that great program. So,
Well,
wonderful job. I meant to thank you earlier.
well, I would have Matt Hurahan speak quarterly to keep us up to speed on what's happening in DC.
He's so good, yeah.
So many changes.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go to that second one where we've got Jessica Burke's name. So again, what I'd like folks to do would be to, we sort of gave you an assignment. Tell us something that you've learned from the program and then how you're going to apply it to your job.
Marissa, if you could get to the slide that has Buffalo State on it, that's where we'll find Jess's name. We're going to start with her so that she can get to where she needs to be. Please and thank you.
You want to sit up here? Yeah. Okay, great. So I think the second slide.
Okay.
Here we go.
Just
Okay.
want to make sure it doesn't advance.
Oh,
There we go.
Okay, Jess, you're up.
we can't hear you, Jess. So if you're on the phone and you have yourself muted, be sure to unmute yourself. If you're using computer audio, let's see if we can find Jess. Jess, are you the 716 number?
I saw her name.
She's not, she couldn't use her computer audio.
All right. Well,
Okay, try now because I unmuted you from this end. You're unmuted. You should be able to speak now.
while we're trying to find you, Jess, why don't we go ahead and move on to Brian at UB, which is the next slide. Because I think, Brian, you may have a conflict too.
Yes, thanks for letting me go earlier. I was thinking about this this morning, and I think one of the things I learned through RAVA was just how vast RF is, and certainly what an appreciation it's given me to know that there's so many of us. That's the endeavor, which has a tendency to become things that I don't touch on a day-to-day, that I found, very, very interesting. And I just wanted to thank the Research Foundation for providing this year. And I tend to be a little bit biased, but I was part of from guidance presentations, so naturally I got to work with some pretty, and I got to meet folks at RF Central this year, which I hadn't before, and I'll always remember that and cherish that experience.
Oh, nice.
Also, in addition to that, I hope to be a constant attendee at the symposiums from now on. I got to go to my first one this past year, and I was just amazed at how large we truly are across the state, and it gave me a deeper appreciation for what we do. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll go back to the beginning of our folks and ask individuals who may be from UAlbany on. Charlene and Lori, I believe you're on. I don't know if Jada, Maggie, or Megan are there, but. Charlene or Lori, I think you may have asked a question earlier, so maybe you can unmute.
We have someone in the chat here.
Donna Williams, right?
I can't see. Okay, I'm sorry, can you read that, Marissa?
Sure, yep. First, I would like to thank everyone. This has been very helpful over the past year. I enjoyed learning more about audits. I gained greater insight on making purchases related to awards and the importance of understanding the limitations of the award. I now understand that when you are considering a purchase related to an award, you need to make sure it can be supported with appropriate documentation and make sure we follow the compliance policies related to awards, gifts, etc., in case you are ever audited. Yes, it's Donna.
Okay. Thank you, Donna.
If you guys aren't sure how to unmute yourselves, *6 will unmute your line, or we can have Marissa unmute everyone. But of the 5 people from UAlbany, if there's anyone that would like to chime in, now's your chance.
Hello, Charlene here.
Good.
There, we
Can
got
you hear me?
Yay.
Yay! So I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed the one on audit findings and how to manage them. I really enjoyed seeing the common issues reported during an audit, and we are going to use that going forward. I know we have a A133 audit coming up soon, so that was very helpful.
Good.
Okay, so for me, this is Lori. Charlene, I was unable to see the audit version or the presentation, but just based on what Charlene said, I'm going to try and schedule it for most of my folks. She thought it was very helpful, so we're going to try and set up something here so that we do sort of a viewing, like a brown bag lunch, to share it with everyone that's going to be touched by the audit that's coming up this fall. For me, I thought the neuroscience was pretty interesting, and how the leadership lessons from neuroscience, how the mechanics of the head actually play into everything. I found that one very interesting.
Good. That's a great idea, Lori, about watching it as a group. These are all recorded, and they're really quality recordings. So I think that's a great idea. Okay, anybody else from Albany? No? All right, we're going to go to Binghamton. Either Michael or Emily.
Hi, this is Michael.
Hi.
Great.
I'd just like to say thanks for including me. I really enjoyed it, and a lot of the variety of the topics covered was very interesting. That's it. One thing that I learned that really hit home was kind of recognizing the divergent interests, priorities, and responsibilities our faculty have. So I know I have my interest out of research development, but being cognizant of faculty's divergent interests, whether it's teaching courses or other service obligations, and learning how to fit that into scheduling with research development was a big help.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I thought that one of the sessions that the faculty did that Carolyn set up for us was really good, kind of hitting that point, Michael. That's great.
Thanks.
Is Emily there by any chance with you, around you?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I don't see her name on the list. How about we go to Peter McLean?
All right, can you hear me now?
We can.
Hey, the star six works. So clearly the most important thing was getting to see Carolyn again for a little bit, but it was nice. I enjoyed the symposium because, you know, getting to see people, having dinner, all those interactions, working on some of the training stuff. I just think that's, you know, a special thing when you get to be face to face with other people and put faces with names and getting to see people again and all. I think that's important. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And while I think some of the material hewed closer to like what we did in mentoring or some of those other training programs, there are little nuggets on each session that you can take away. Maybe you didn't hear them the first time, or maybe someone added in something extra. And so I think that, to me, that's the takeaway there. I can't necessarily point to like, oh, this one specific training was the one that stuck out to me, but each of them had little bits and pieces that I enjoyed.
Good.
And Peter, I will send that comment on to Carolyn. I'm sure.
Thank you.
Good. All right, let's go to the next slide. We got Jessica from Buff State. How about Robert? Are you on?
Jess is here. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can. We can hear you now. Go, please.
Yay! I don't know what was going on. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I approached the academy just to try and determine, what my leadership ability was, my strengths, my weaknesses, and I wasn't disappointed. From the many sessions, I learned a variety of things, and it wasn't just the presenter I learned from. It was more the comments or maybe a question that my fellow participants had.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like Peter, I jotted down a lot of notes, I think, and at least some notes in every session. There was something I took away, whether it was, transformational leadership or, the 6 domains of knowledge, just things, or the neuroscience, and then discovering the Mind Tools website. I think that came up in something because that was in my folder. You know, just different things that I'm now trying to explore, or books to read, resources. It's just been a wealth of knowledge that I've greatly appreciated. So I'd like to thank Carolyn, Marissa for filling in today, and Kathleen and Jamie. I mean, this was absolutely wonderful for me, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Robert, I don't see you signed in, so I'm gonna assume that's a no, but let's go to Oneonta. Alex or Melissa?
Okay, so Melissa did put in the chat. My biggest takeaway was from RAVA was more general and can be applied to wherever my career path takes me. It was from the leadership lessons from neuroscience session, and it was about finding your sweet spot for performance and that we should match our environment to our personal performance. I've almost always done this in my various positions, but almost felt guilty about it because it may have looked different from someone else. I feel like this has freed me up to excel and really contribute my best to my employer without comparing myself to others. I always felt the navigating your ship through the academic minefield was very informative and helped me better work with faculty on a regular basis. Also want to thank everyone who made this learning experience. Oh, I think we're getting a lot of comments. Okay. Also want to thank everyone who made this learning experience possible and to everyone else who contributed and participated. It's Melissa from UB, smiley face.
Okay.
Sorry, I said that a little early.
Yeah, it's a different Melissa, but I was glad to hear from her. Is Melissa Nicosia on the phone?
Alexandra
Okay.
from Oneonta has a.
And then, yes, Alexandra had said, I'm having audio issues as well. It was a great experience to learn just how diverse our campuses are. We don't do a lot of research at our campus. We have lots of migrant programs. So it was interesting to learn more about actual research programs. It was also great to be able to hear all of the best practices that were offered throughout the year and to learn about topics that are not part of my job. For example, during the uniform guidance session, the part about retroactive payroll redistribution and the reports that are available, or the IFR changes and those reports. It's something that I can share with my coworker who does all of that. Overall, it was a great experience. Thank you. Melissa N. is out today.
Okay. How about Suzanne or Cyrus from optometry?
I know Suzanne is not here. Cyrus is here. Cyrus, I unmuted you if you'd like to try to speak to us.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, there you go. I was trying to press *6. Yeah, so for me, they actually told me to join this because they told me that it's going to be helpful for me being new to sponsored programs. And it really did. You know, I learned a lot of things. And, you know, it's like I noticed that, you know, the things that I'm observing from our end, I realized it's not only happening to our campus, you know, that it's happening to a lot of locations. And I think, like, especially like today, about how federal grants are kind of declining, and, you know, like we have to consider looking into clinical trials and industry-sponsored trials, you know, all those things. And yeah, so all in all, this is like a great experience, and I would like to thank everyone for having me here.
Thank you, Cyrus. All right, let's go to UB. We've heard from Brian. And we heard from Melissa. Is there anybody else that's on?
Hello?
Hi.
Hi, this is Lisa Zimmerman.
Hi, Lisa.
Okay, a couple of the sessions that really stood out to me. One back in May, the navigating yourself through the academic minefield. And I've shared this with several of my colleagues. regarding, or for people who didn't quite understand what faculty go through, what their lifestyle's like with the proposal and pressure deadlines, but also vice versa, or something related to that. It was really nice to hear that staff, the faculty need to be cognizant that staff have their own areas of critical expertise, and that really resonated with me, and I've repeated that many times. Also, the unleashing the power of data analytics to lead, that really updated my exposure to where we are. And in the state of the art, I was awfully behind, and that was awakening to see, to hear those. And now have invested more time into using data analytics to improve our student experiences and outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Martina, I have unmuted.
Yeah, Martina's there, and I think Sevi is there. Did I see that name?
Yes, this is Martina. I'm here with Wei and Sunny. I'm just going to go ahead first.
Okay.
Thanks again for the opportunity. And throughout the RAVA program, actually, the program provides a wide range of topics and actually depth for each topic. It's interesting because, I'm in the central office, so we do grants management, but throughout the RAVA program, actually, there's a lot of different topics that kind of remind us to say, okay, yep, there's also part of it kind of related to grants management and related to the RF. So it's actually refreshing. As far as what I would use to apply for the to the job, so far for some of the sessions that if I see is applicable and interesting, like I said, a lot of stuff is actually pretty in-depth training, and with the recorded links coming out from the office, from the central, I've been forwarding them to within our office, and also on our campus we have kind of like a research admin network. So I have been sharing those information, so then folks in Buffalo are also, not just within our office, but at campus level, they're also be aware of that as well. So thank you.
Great news. Love to hear that.
This is Sunny. We learned a lot from audit findings and uniform guidance. There's a lot of information, and then we also share the information with all of our office. We have a lot of discussion about it. So thank you for the very helpful sections.
Hi, this is Wei. And as Sunny mentioned, Sunny and I, we are both like award analysts. So the most interesting topic for us is the study of the uniform guidance. We discuss a lot of topics that, like the findings from the auditing, the example that we shared during the session, and we do like a brainstorm at our awareness meeting, and we find that's very helpful, and it helps us like to restructure our review procedures and make our policy more clear. And also we like, for me, like previously I just like when I came across a question, I will refer to the guidance, like the beautiful guidance for reference. But now we kind of bought that book and we just start from the beginning and see what we to fresh our knowledge. Yeah, that's what my take out.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, and if you can keep it going on your campus, I think that would really be wonderful. Anybody else from UB?
I think Netta has her typed up in the comments.
Okay. You see that, Marissa?
I can read it. I can see it from here. My role is so small within the scope of research administration at SUNY. Even after 20 years at UB, it's always eye-opening to take a peek into the variety of factors that make up research administration as a whole. I look forward to continuing to partner with my colleagues who are an invaluable resource in the UB-sponsored projects office, as well as those across the university and the Research Foundation statewide. It is my hope that I will continue to be able to attend the symposium to further build upon the foundation RAVA has established for me. And then Jennifer Roods, I don't know if there, she's,
Jennifer's at Upstate.
She's at Upstate. Is there anybody else from UB? Again, it's *6 if you're on the phone to unmute yourself. Otherwise, we'll move to the next.
Yeah, let's go to
next slide.
ESF.
ESF folks.
I know Lisa helped form a panel with Brian from UB. Thank you.
This is, sorry, Kathleen, this is Kate.
Oh, good. As in Kate Edwards?
Yes, it is.
Good. What do you got?
So, thank you so much for allowing me to participate. This has been a really great experience. The biggest takeaways for me is just how collaborative and how collaborative everyone has been with including comments in the chats and really just opening up my eyes. I'm going to echo Jess from Buffalo's comments where, really writing down notes from colleagues and things that I hadn't thought of before. I'm just really appreciative of the opportunities both in RAVA and outside of RAVA that I've been able to participate in and engage more with my colleagues from other campuses. And then it's really just helped me to be more creative but consistent with some of the stuff that I have been approached with in my work and my day-to-day duties. So this has just been a really great experience.
That's great, Kate. Thank you. I know we've had you on a design team. That was fun.
It was great. I loved doing that. I hope to participate again soon.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else from ESF? Cheryl or Susan? No, I don't see any folks. Okay. How about our next page? We've got system with Clarisse. Are you on by any chance? Oh, okay. We heard from Donna Williams, but how about from Jennifer from Upstate?
So Jennifer replied in the chat, I definitely enjoyed bits and pieces, as Peter said earlier, from each session. Thank you. One takeaway I can share would be from the Unleash the Power of Data Analytics to Lead session. Going forward, my plan is to utilize data metrics in a better way to help support the growth of my office and the overall research mission of the RF and Upstate.
Nice. Okay, I'm here at Central Office. We've got Janice, Alona, and Sue. I'll start with you, Alona.
Actually, the RAVA sessions help me to realize again that the research administration is a very complex matter. But is it
I'm having a little trouble hearing.
Oh, okay.
You have to speak up. The speaker's way up there. I'm sorry.
The sessions, the RAVA session helped me to realize that the research administration is a very complex matter, but it's the good news also that we can learn from each other, one campus from each other, from the experience, from the previous experience. And I also enjoyed the meeting people at the symposium when we could put faces into the names. And I think I like very much the session, methodological session. And also I think that it will help me to apply some tips from the organization to organize myself better.
Nice. Great. How about you, Jan?
I think as many people said, the leadership lessons really hit home with me. All just the different facets of it, and then how to mesh that together with the work-related knowledge that we also learned about. And again, just listening to others' comments and questions and understanding the faculty perspective. Every day you learn something new, no matter how much you think you know, you're always learning something new. So for me, that was a really great part of it, is to just listen to other people and learn things from them, and then put it together with the leadership lessons and the 6 domains. I really enjoyed those.
Thank you. How about you, Sue?
I enjoyed the sessions. One of the biggest takeaways I had was on how to work effectively in a legal, compliant, and ethical regulatory environment. The short title was saying no to power. And the speaker talked about integrity, not just when it's convenient, but even when it might be uncomfortable for you to go and say something about something that you're seeing or hearing. And they brought out practical suggestions like picking your battles wisely, share your goals and outcomes with your teammates, request information or help, and be constructive, and don't go to war every time. So I really enjoyed those, and I took away a lot from that session.
Thank you. Is Julio on the call from SPO? No? Okay. So we've got Polly. So I'm sorry when I said Melissa Miller was from Buffalo. That might have been Melissa Miller from Polly, since we have two of them. Okay. Is Kim on, or Catherine, or I think Carly's on. Yes.
Carly, I've just unmuted you if you'd like to, well, I'm trying to unmute you. There you go. You should be unmuted, Carly, if you'd like to try. If you used your phone audio, it's *6.
Hello.
Hi, there you go.
Hi. Oh, perfect. So as many other people said, I enjoyed the leadership session, and I think Susan Phillips from UAlbany presented about the PI's roles, and she outlined that all the pressures that they face. So becoming more aware of those and understanding the PI's motivations really helped me keep a positive and open line of communication with them. So I really liked that session.
Awesome. Good. Anybody else on from Polly?
Yeah, I'm here with Carly. This is Melissa. Kim is out today, so she won't be able to give her feedback for you. But I really enjoyed the contract presentation. I thought it was an excellent overview of contracts and the process that they go to, that they go through. Excuse me. It just came away with a better understanding of how they're put together. And I also enjoyed the leadership lessons from neuroscience. I think it was a great reminder of what I need to do in order to be successful, but also what I need to do, that even though I'm not a leader of a team, to help people who I work with become successful, and how I can have a positive impact on the people in my department. But and overall, I thought it was a really great 12 months of learning, and I did have other takeaways that I can apply to my day-to-day.
That's great,
So
Melissa.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Anybody else? So I know you said Kimberly's not there. How about Catherine? I didn't see her name. Okay. So how about Stony Brook? Do we have anybody from Stony Brook? I think Lori might be on.
Lori put something on the comments as to Michelle Hop.
Okay.
So Michelle first said, I am off campus today working remotely as we are having our HVAC system in our office updated, so I'm limited on audio. I found the contracts masterclass and the auditing session the most helpful in terms of my daily realm of work. I really liked the leadership abilities session. It was very helpful. I enjoyed the neuroscience session too. I feel that these have all been beneficial to me on a daily basis and enhance the work I do daily. Thank you for the opportunity. That was Michelle at Stony Brook.
Yeah.
And then Lori writes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this program. I've learned so much. The contract sessions helped me understand more about working with contracts and what to look for, and explain some things I was not completely clear on, since I do not set up the contracts and did not know how much was involved. I also learned from the audit session and find I'm more critical of how I do things. I also enjoyed attending the symposium for the first time and attending the different workshops and interacting with others from the various campuses in central office. I look forward to future programs like RAVA and attending another symposium.
Nice. I'm so happy to hear that people were able to attend the symposium. We did put it on the calendar. And yet I didn't get to see everybody, although many of us were at dinner together. So I'm really glad that it was a positive experience. Is there anybody we didn't get a chance to listen to or hear from in chat?
Lori's here, but I can't.
Hi, this is Christine from Stony Brook. Can you hear me?
Christine, yes, thank you.
Hi, how are you? I just, some of the notes that I had written down was that one that I realized throughout this 12 months that sponsor programs office isn't this big mean entity and just creating rules on its own. It's nice to see that there's SUNY RF is behind and like a driving force for support and available for any questions and helping us take in funding. I work outside of sponsor programs, so it was never really clear to me like where the policies were being established from, so that was helpful to learn. Okay. Out of the sessions that I really enjoyed, I thought the audit one was great. I never realized that there were so many different types of audits. I'm definitely going to keep it in mind. Every time I create a proposal, I kind of have like this audit person on my shoulder now, just watching me create things. And then the common thread that I took throughout the whole 12-month period was the importance of education, the importance of not only from an administrative standpoint, that we become more educated in what we do and why we do it, but also from a faculty standpoint, you know, and how we can help educate them about the processes. And me also, I enjoyed the RF Symposium, and I hope that I get to go again.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lori from Stony Brook is in the chat. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this program. I've learned so much. The contract session helped me understand more about working with contracts and what to look for, and explain some things I was not completely clear on, since I do not set up the contracts. I do not know how much I was involved. Can I already read
Yes, you do.
Why do I feel like, okay, sorry.
So thank you.
My apologies.
It's very hot in the room we're in. Anybody else from Stony Brook? Okay. I think then we've heard from everybody who's either on the chat or on the phone. Does that look right, Marissa and Jamie? We've just about got everybody?
Yeah, I think we have everybody. And there's no more messages in the chat, it looks like.
Everybody in the chat.
Good. So I guess there's a couple things. One of them, I'm really happy to hear that some of these sessions went over well, because from our perspective, we weren't sure. Based on the fact that this is virtual, you're not getting any, I can't see anybody's faces. I can't tell if it appealed to you. So I'm really happy to hear that some of these, either the ones that the Sale Institute, you know, were able to bring to the table, faculty and some staff, or the ones that we developed here in-house. I'm really happy to hear that many of you liked some of the same sessions. So next up, we'd like you to know that we have a certificate that has sort of an acknowledgement of the RAVA program with your name on it. So you'll be getting that. And also, I will be looking for some volunteers to help me design the next session. So we're due to have another academy in January of 2020. I don't really know what it's going to look like. I'm not sure yet. I'm hearing that some of the sessions that we did that are recorded, we can use as a demo and discuss. I'm hearing a lot of people like the face-to-face, and so we'll obviously get all of your good feedback from the RAVA program. Jamie's been excellent in keeping all of this sort of organized and in order. But again, we will be looking for volunteers to help plan the next session. We'll be designing the next academy starting in the fall, probably September and October. So with that, I want to say congratulations and a big thank you to Carolyn and to Marissa today for filling in. And I'd like us to do a virtual round of applause for Jamie Kingsley, who has been here for every single one of these and has helped me tremendously. So round of applause, virtual. And with that said, congratulations. Thank you very much. And we look forward to your feedback.